Hello and welcome to the Drawing Animal Podcast with Wesley Bear. I'm your host, Wesley Bear, and on today's episode, we will be briefly talking about the fire salamander. Now, the fire salamander is basically your average sized salamander with yellow markings or fiery orange markings that are said to resemble fire. The other reason it's called the fire salamander is because it was believed by ancients to have come out of fire. This may have just been due to the setting of fires, and as soon as the fire started, of course, the animal would scurry out of usually rotten logs or twigs that had been piled up, and thus they thought they came out of fire when it was just the heat kind of just woke them up and they scurried out. But yeah, fire salamanders are pretty um, average size, about 6 to 12 inches long, so about almost a foot on average. Um, they are found throughout most of continental Europe, and they are toxic. So their skin is very toxic to touch, and if you tried to eat one, it wouldn't taste very good. Now, at least for humans, it's not all that much of a problem, but it would still not be a very good thing. And to some animals who are much smaller, it might be deadly. Plus, fire salamanders do have a defensive technique with their toxins in which they have basically toxin glands underneath their eyelids. So basically, they can actually use specialized muscles to spray that that toxic spray about a meter. So if you got that in your face, it wouldn't be very pleasant either. So try to avoid getting super up close to fire salamanders if you can help it. Um, but they will, of course, live mostly deep, dark places in the forest, usually in caves or under boulders or under rotten logs. Um, they'll basically eat anything that moves, um, and anything that's really bigger than them will eat them. So even insects have been known to eat fire salamanders, especially if they're young or they're are just developing. Speaking of which, uh, firemen's, fire salamanders are oviviparous, which means they give birth to live young. So this is true in some amphibians and some reptiles, and it might have been already mentioned here on the podcast. I think with the elephant trunk snake is that they have eggs within their body that they keep and hatch, and as soon as they hatch, they are born. So they will hatch inside and then are given birth live. And that's why it's called live birth uh, in those types of animals, even though technically there are still eggs involved. Uh, Fire salamanders, again, pretty average, normal looking salamanders, but unfortunately, it doesn't mean that fire salamanders are free from any problems. The most biggest and most substantial problem that has developed, especially in the last 10 years or so, for fire salamanders is something called basalt. Basalt is a deadly fungus. Now, like with most salamanders and most frogs, they breathe through their skin. So that's how salamanders and frogs are able to live in water and receive oxygen as they breathe through their skin. This becomes a problem, however, because it basically allows tons of environmental factors such as pollution and stuff to basically enter into their skin, underneath their skin, and eventually into their blood system. And the biggest issue right now in regards to that is called Basal, BSAL, and it's a deadly fungus that basically infects the mouth and skin of the animal to basically where it cannot breathe or cannot eat anymore. It basically fills up their throat and their mouth, and then they're incapable of eating. So it's a very deadly disease, and it's been developed more and more, especially in the last 10 years, especially actually as the pet trade has increased. Fire salamanders have been a common pet within the pet trading industry, and that can be good as it can be heavily monitored and more breeding opportunities. However, a lot of this can easily be abused, and mostly a lot of this is coming from the Asian pet trade market, which of course is often very corrupt and very illegal. And so the development of the Asian market pet trade has allowed diseases to flow back and forth, and one of them is this fungus, deadly fungus vessel. So always be careful where you get your, again, pet frogs, salamanders, reptiles, especially from birds and other small animals can also be a factor, but especially with reptiles and amphibians, deadly disease can easily be spread. So definitely be careful with that. So there you are. There is the fire salamander. If you want to learn more, please subscribe to the podcast where I put out more drawings each podcast at least once a week. I do an ungulate quickie on Wednesdays that you can look at, and then feel free to look at my books, the Crazy Creatures series on Amazon under the name Wesley Bear. So there you are. Enjoy nature, enjoy drawing, enjoy God's creation, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.